development class, we'll be looking at the factors that led to the collapse of the West African Student Union. The first factor that led to the collapse is the emerging political events in British West Africa as a result of the constitutional reforms before the end of the Second World War. So the emerging political events in British West Africa as a result of the constitutional reforms before the Second World War led to the collapse of the Western African Student Union. So the rise of political events in Britain, West Africa, as a result of the constitutional reforms before the end of the Second World War led to the collapse of the West African Student Union. The formation of political parties in West Africa also weakened the existence of this union. Another factor that led to the collapse of the West African Student Union is the activities of the West African Student Union was mostly centered in London instead of West African towns and villages. The activities were not directly felt by the ordinary people in British West Africa. It was not felt by the ordinary people of British West Africa. It was centered in London. It was instead of West African towns and villages. So that was also one of the factors that led to the collapse of the union. Also, the West African Student Union was an elite group. The West African Student Union was an elite group. It aimed at improving the welfare and interest of its members and not that of the people of West Africa. It was for the educated, the privileged ones, and it aimed at improving the welfare and interest of its members and not the old people of West Africa. Another factor that led to the collapse of the West African Student Union was that it was a proto-nationalist movement. We already talked about proto-nationalism in our previous classes. To look more into that, please check our previous videos. It was a proto-nationalist movement whose mode of operation was conservative and therefore did not appeal to the people of West Africa. So the West African Student Union was a proto-nationalist movement. It was more of allowing these people to be more involved in their affairs rather than it was more of allowing the people to be involved in their affairs rather than for self-government. So it was a proto-nationalist movement, and their mode of operation was conservative, and it therefore did not appeal to the people of West Africa. Another factor that led to the collapse of the West African Student Union was from the mid-30s, the trend of the nationalists has shifted from inter-territorial to intra-territorial. So it was no more the association of West African Student Union. It was now more of they were more focused on their nations rather than on the association of West African countries. They were now focused on their own nation. So it changed from inter-territorial to intra-territorial, and this was also one of the factors that led to the collapse of the West African Student Union. From the mid-30s, the nationalists had shifted from inter-territorial to intra-territorial or national phenomenon in West African territory. So they were more involved in their own national, in their own country's nationalist movement rather than the nationalist movement of West Africa as a whole. Also, the union faced leadership tussles after the leadership of the founder. It faced leadership tussles after the leadership of the founder, Ladipo Solanke. Also, the ineffective organization mechanism was another problem that confronted the union. The organization was not effective. It was the method used by the organization was not effective, and so that was also another problem that confronted this union and further led to the collapse of the union. Also, they had inadequate funding to carry out their activities, and this was a major hindrance, and it further led to the collapse of the West African Student Union. Inadequate funding to carry out their activities was another major hindrance that further led to the collapse of the West African Student Union. And with that, we've come to the end of this class. In the course of this class, we looked at the factors that led to the collapse of the West African Student Union. In the next class, we'll be looking at another nationalist movement called the National Congress of British West Africa, and I'll see you at the next class.